This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com. This week I got to talk to Bradley Ruthers about the olden days of wrestling, some comparisons to All Elite Wrestling, and the current state of Pittsburgh and West Virginia independent wrestling. Whether it's then, now, or forever, this is Occupy Pro Wrestling. Hello and welcome to Occupy Pro Wrestling, the podcast with more comebacks from retirement than Terry Funk. I'm your host, Alex Smiley, and boy howdy do I have a show for you this week. Later on you'll be hearing my chat with Bradley Ruthers as we discuss his time watching wrestling on Saturday mornings, along with why they call him Heel Bradley, and his apparent rivalry of sorts with Chris LaRusso. This is my first interview in several months, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. And quite frankly, I'm just really happy to be podcasting again. I've been dealing with some personal issues, but things have kind of settled down. I'm very thankful to be talking about wrestling with you guys again. There is, of course, only one way to make sure that this podcast is up and running, and that's to make sure we get our plugs in first. The central hub for all things Occupy Pro Wrestling can be found at our website at occupyprowrestling.com. There you'll find the latest articles from our site partners, along with some new media like Flashback Friday and The Bright Side of Wrestling coming soon. If you like what you hear from this and previous episodes, be sure to subscribe to the Occupy Pro Wrestling podcast over at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and wherever you may be listening to your favorite podcasts. You can also check us out on social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and much more at the Smarks. And if you really like what's going on, you can support us financially. You can purchase merch over at whatamaneuver.net under Occupy Pro Wrestling, or at our merch shop at shop.occupyprowrestling.com. You can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/occupyprowrestling. Be like our friends at the Wrestling Mayhem Show and support us for $1 or more per month and get some awesome bonuses. And with that, it's time for the return of an old friend. It's time for the Partner Spotlight. First and foremost, I'd like to give a big welcome to the newest Occupy Pro Wrestling site partner at ESPN Sports Sims. This is the home of the HIFL, run by my buddy Talon, along with some other really awesome sports simulation games. Be sure to check all of it out in a great community over at ESPN SportsSims.net. Our friends at 80s Mania Wrestling have their third iteration, 80s Mania Wrestling Returns, available now at the Apple app and Google Play stores, so be sure to give it a look. Coming later this year, Modern Mania Wrestling. My buddy Sean has had some recent videos up on his Facebook page, whether it's interviews with wrestlers or just reviews in general. Be sure to check all that out at his Facebook page at Sean's 2 Cents on Facebook. Our friends at the Indie Corner are still going strong with reviews and news on the latest in indie wrestling and much more. Be sure to check that out and their podcast at theindiecorner.com. The MFX podcast has grown tremendously since the last time this podcast was on air, growing to include a second podcast known as 3PB. Be sure to check that out and all the rest of MFX podcasts at mfxpodcast.com. Old School Wrestling is currently in a state of transition as we move on from Volume 1, which ended with the Ring of Dreams 2019, to a new beginning with Volume 2. Be sure to check out weareosw.com for more details as they're made available as we begin our build towards the first show of the new volume, Lambs to the Slaughter. Single Leg Takedown continues to go strong as they cover everything from WWE to Impact to indie wrestling and much more. Be sure to check them out at sltdwrestling.com. What a Maneuver continues to put out great high-quality merch, such as the latest from Stokely Hathaway, not to be confused with Chuck Taylor. Be sure to check that and much more out at whatamaneuver.net. Our friends at WrestleView continue to put out a continuous stream of content, from new news articles to reviews and results of the latest shows, to not one but two podcasts and much more. Be sure to check all of that out at WrestleView.com. And of course, you can check out all the latest from our friends at Wrestling Mayhem Show, including the latest episodes of the WMS Podcast and Indie Mayhem Show over at WrestlingMayhemShow.com. With all of that out of the way, I just wanted to express how happy, how excited I am to be recording this podcast, and how excited I am to be sharing my interview with Bradley Ruthers with you right now. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Hello everyone, this is Alex Smiley. I am here at this time with a man that's well known in the Pittsburgh and West Virginia area as Heel Bradley. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm here with Bradley Ruthers. Hi Bradley, welcome to the show.
Hello, Alex. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Are you going to, like, as you have this interview, like, suddenly tell me about how much you like Omaha steaks or something?
No, that's a separate pre-tape segment.
Yeah. Oh, okay. You pre-tape it later, and then you like interjected like you're interrupting me. Like, I want to get to that story, Bradley. But first, I want to tell you about this really great cat litter. It's really good.
Right. It's like, speaking of Virgil, let me tell you about a great place where you can get some tables. No. Yeah. No. Yeah. No. So yeah, I just I've mentioned to people before. Goal of the show is to have a nice little conversation about wrestling. What got us into it and all that. So I got a few questions that I've got down on my notes. So I'm going to start with that. So my first question for you is, what is your earliest memory of pro wrestling? That could be something you watched in person or on TV or whatever.
My very first memory, my very first interaction with it was when I was very young. And my guess is this is probably 79, if not 80. I don't think it was much later than that. I remember watching a show, and there's two things I remember specifically. One was there was I'm going to say it was a enhancement talent, a jobber match. And the guy that was beating up the other guy, all I remember was his name was Superfly.
Oh.
And what specifically, I don't remember seeing his face. I just remember his head being this big giant ball of black hair. And he was beating up somebody, and I'm watching that, and I'm like, okay, so that's happening. And then a guy came out who I gotta think was Sergeant Slaughter. And he had he was a Cobra Clutch challenge. He was going to give whatever amount of money to whomever could break the Cobra Clutch. And one of the announcers took up the challenge.
Okay.
And so he goes in the ring, and who I'm presuming is Sergeant Slaughter, puts him in the Cobra Clutch. And it goes on for a long time. There's a big brouhaha. Other people are going in there. I remember the announcer was in it. For whatever reason, he's bleeding because of the Cobra Clutch. I don't understand where that happened. I'm watching all of this, and my dad comes in the room, and I point at that, and they're like, "Dad, look at all that." Dad's like, "It's all fake."
Oh no.
And that's my earliest memory. I didn't think anything else of it for many, many years. And I'd say when I first really started watching I'm going to say it was the fall of 85. And I still watched cartoons, when Saturday morning cartoons were going on. And I was getting frustrated because on one of our Pittsburgh channels, once it got to be 12 o'clock, cartoons were over. You're watching wrestling now. And I'm like, I don't want to watch. I'm going to Okay, you know what? All right, I'll give it a chance. I'll watch the wrestling. and it was NWA Worldwide Wrestling, and I started
Nice.
really watching it, and I started really getting into it. This was about the time. I mean, one of the first big incidents I remember was watching the clip of when Ric Flair had defeated Nikita Koloff. Ivan comes in, Dusty tries to get in their way, and Ric Flair had been warning Dusty to stop getting in my business. And then the Andersons come in and they break Dusty's leg, and that's the formation of the Four Horsemen.
Wow, that's awesome.
That's like one of the first vivid memories of a huge wrestling thing happening. And then from there, yeah, you started watching World Class, started watching WWF and other indies that they showed and stuff like that.
Man, that's great. That's awesome. See, I especially like what you said about like after, because it was after the cartoons the wrestling would be on. That made me think of I think it was just a few months when they had the Saturday Morning Slam on the CW during that
Mm-hmm.
partnership. And I'm like, that would be kind of cool to have something like that again, you know?
Well, they tried it for a while, and first off, I don't think anybody has Saturday morning cartoons anymore.
Yeah, that was like the very tail end of the history
Yeah.
of the cartoon era. Because
Mm-hmm.
I remember someone pointed out, like, I think it was like Sonic X on Fox Kids was like one of the last cartoons to be on Saturday mornings, and then when they cancel that, I think it's all been replaced by either the educational live action shows on some of the networks or just nothing of any real significance.
News.
Yeah, news. But yeah, so
Yeah.
because yeah, the cartoons is what I remember as a kid for sure. But I remember just the fact that they kind of did that formula, what kind of how you mentioned of having the wrestling in that time slot in a modern age, and it was fun while it lasted. But that's
Well,
really
it's I guess it's a transition from okay, cartoons. Let's get something just a little bit more intellectual, and then we can go into actual sports. So what do we put in the between? We'll put the wrestling there. We'll put the wrestling there.
yeah. Still, and that's really cool that your earlier stuff that you remember is stuff like the formation of the Four Horsemen, because you know, like for me, that's just like a big moment in history of wrestling is stuff like that.
I
So
was in a question and answer session with Matt Stryker, and I remember the smile on his face when I mentioned that was one of my earliest memories.
nice.
It's really cool sometimes when you talk to a wrestler and you talk about some early memories, not recent stuff, not in DX things. I remember getting a smile from Chance Prophet because I was mentioning to him one of my early favorite wrestling matches was actually Barry Windham. It was they had a U.S. title tournament, and the show was all around the finals. It was a 1 hour show with the old World Championship Wrestling when it was not WCW, it was NWA, and the
Right.
match was Ronnie Garvin and Barry Windham versus the Midnight Express with Jim Cornette.
Nice.
And the ending sequence was just watch the end of that match sometime, and it's choreographed so well. Ronnie Garvin is chasing Jimmy Cornette around the ring while the Barry Windham tries to do this and that, and they coordinated to the Midnight Express winning, and that was one of my favorite sequences I saw. There was no flips or anything. It was just choreographed and put together so well. The Midnight Express accidentally won the match. It was great. And I remember talking about Jimmy Cornette being chased by Ronnie Garvin, and I remember the smile on Chance Prophet's face when I was telling him about that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was thinking about that because like the old NWA and like the stuff how NWA was running in those days. My mind keeps going back to stuff like when they had the Great American Bash as like a tour of shows instead of just one You know,
Yeah,
like
that was a
that's
that was a great idea for a promotion
yeah,
because you kind of felt like you were going to the pay-per-view, but the tour was just more house shows. That's really all it
right.
was.
Like the closest thing you have to that now is like when WWE has certain themed live events, like the Road to WrestleMania tour, is like a bunch of random shows before WrestleMania time,
Yeah.
which I don't even. Maybe I just don't pay as much attention to the live event calendar anymore. But I used to notice stuff like that, especially because like I want to say 3 years ago, around President's Day weekend, they actually had a Road to WrestleMania tour live event in Long Beach, and I remember being kind of unfortunate because I was working up in the mountains at a camp at the time, and I couldn't get that weekend off
Oh,
because it was a holiday. I was like, oh well, that's a bummer.
yeah.
But it's just a point of like but yeah, just the idea of like, and I think it was, and it's like almost more to the point of like how NWA promoted those because they promoted them as each one was kind of a big deal on the tour, you know,
They did,
like it wasn't
and
just like sorry, I was just like because WWE's thing is like they always like to promote the brand, like come see the WWE experience,
mhm.
you know.
Um, especially at that time, WWE was it truly was WWE was entertainment and NWA was wrestling.
Right.
I mean, you watch WWE and the characters were a bit more cartoonish. They weren't quite at the point yet where what profession do we have a pro wrestler for yet? Do we have one that's a garbage man? No. Okay, let's get a garbage man out there. And NWA still was played itself as a wrestling organization. And you had guys like Ronnie Garvin that had personality. They didn't come out to any entrance music, and they didn't have some gimmick where they wore something or they had face paint. They just went out there,
Right.
So
Right.
there was a lot more of that at NWA. I mean, Magnum TA didn't have that much of a gimmick to him.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a good wrestler that had a bit of a personality that you could delineate from some other people. Tully Blanchard didn't have that much of a gimmick to him. He had a personality to wrestle, and he knew how to make people angry. So
Yeah.
it wasn't so much like you go to WWF and you had a bit more. Okay, there's the Junkyard Dog. Randy Savage had a bit more flamboyancy to him. Sort of like that sort of thing.
Yeah. 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 That's great. Yeah, um it's just, and it's kind of funny to be talking about that like in this day and age too, like with the the debut of all elite wrestling and what they're
Oh
saying,
yeah.
their whole point is that it is an alternative. It's like, and a lot of people kind of complain about like, oh, you can't compete with WWE, and it seems like AEW's uh kind of method of competing is just by being an alternative, you know? And so it's just kind of cool to kind of see something like that happening again, because it's like even when we had the Monday Night Wars, I was so young that I didn't get into wrestling until after the Attitude Era had basically ended already, you know?
Okay.
So just like for my perspective, it was like I started watching wrestling, like I started watching WWE in particular, kind of the end of, like, regularly watching it, the end of 2000. My first pay per view was Armageddon, the one with the 6-man Hell in a Cell. But
Okay.
like before that, I think I saw like a segment here and a segment there kind of deal. Because I distinctly remember like my parents would occasionally tune to Monday Night Raw as they're flipping channels or whatever. So I got to see like the Mankind Rock This Is Your Life segment on TV
Okay.
when it happened. I remember that. But it was just one of
Yeah.
those, it was like those singular moments that just kind of happened as we were watching, but I didn't really get into it till late 2000. And by then, Attitude Era was basically on its way out, and WCW ended. So the whole Monday Night War was like beef. That whole section was just before my time, so to speak. So it's just
I
like so it's like now we're seeing something different with that, where it's like,
Yeah.
Like AEW's not. Well, I'm trying to decide whether to say AEW's not trying to be WCW because there's certain things. There's just certain like little things and maybe not so little things where it feels a little like WCW, but
Well,
maybe in
it's
a good
hard not to
way.
look at it like that because when you think of it in historically, over the last 30 years, what was the biggest competitor to WWE, WWF? It was NWA, WCW.
Right,
So it's hard not to compare somebody that's really rivaling them to NWA, WCW.
for sure.
One thing I want to quickly interject. When I was watching some of there would be a few independent shows that would be on some of the Pittsburgh channels. I remember one that was on there. It might have been, I forget what regional area that used to play some independent wrestling. I didn't pay too much attention to it, but I specifically remember seeing one that had Cactus Jack on it.
Oh, nice.
And this was way before he was at WCW or any of that.
Right.
So I remember seeing that. I'm sure some of the local fans were probably at the place
Right.
when as far as indie wrestling, and we'll talk about me with indie wrestling.
Oh yeah.
I've really only been going to indie shows for about 5.5 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, it's funny you were mentioning like the local Pittsburgh show and having Cactus Jack before WCW and all, and, like, because that was actually going to be my next thing was like, because like I said at the top of this, you know, you're kind of known among people for being in the Pittsburgh and West Virginia area at the indie shows. So I was going to ask you, like, you said you've been going to indie shows for only about 5 years, so I guess I'm curious as to what got you started on indie wrestling then.
Um, I didn't really for most of the time that the decades or so that I was into watching wrestling. I didn't even think about whether the indies existed. I didn't think about it at all. And I remember seeing um, one of the websites, like I think it was PW Torch, was showing something that says, "Oh, by the way, here's an old match between Brian Danielson, and John
Mm,
Moxley."
mm.
And I remember watching that. It was clearly in a high school gymnasium. And I remember watching that thinking, now, wait a minute. You mean I could go someplace and watch some of these wrestlers before they make it big?
Mm.
And it got my curiosity going a little bit. And I had a trip to Niagara Falls, and I was enjoying my trip, and I was down to the last day, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do that night. And I specifically remember seeing a flyer on a barber shop,
Mm-hmm.
and the flyer said, wrestling and if I could, Neo Wrestling Federation.
Okay.
And it advertised that, and I thought to myself, I'll go. It'll be stupid. It'll be dumb, but I'll go and I'll have fun, whatever. Well, just to show you how dumb this place is, their champion was Tyson Dukes. So, you can't be too stupid if you got Tyson Dukes on your show.
Right, right.
Is there any? I don't think there's anybody else. Oh, Cody Deaner was on that show.
That sounds familiar. Like the name sounds familiar.
Cody Deaner he was on TNA very shortly as ODB's boyfriend.
Oh, I think I remember that actually.
And right now on Impact, Cody Deaner is in a tag team with a guy that's being named Josh Deaner.
Oh, okay.
But he's known as or Joe Deaner or something. I think he's known as Joe something on the Indies.
The idea is that they're almost forcing a Diener brothers.
It's a Deaner Cousins thing.
Diener cousins. Okay, I got you.
Yeah. So I went to the show, and it was a tournament. They were having a tournament to decide who was going to face Tyson Dukes for the title. And the final match of that was Cody Deaner versus the Lord of the Bling, Tiberius King.
Huh.
And it was a phenomenal match. It was a great match. And I was flabbergasted. And I wanted more. So when I got home from the trip, I started going online and looking at what organizations were near me, and I started going to some shows and going some more and more. And I'd say within about 5 or 6 months, I'm where I am now, where I could go to anywhere between 2 to 4 shows a month.
Right. That's cool.
The only problem with that is I've got wrestlers that threaten me regularly, and that makes it tough, really.
Yeah.
Probably one of the ones that threatened me the most is Chris LaRusso.
Oh boy. Okay. Okay. Yeah. We'll get to that. I was gonna because like I
Okay.
said, so because you've been so well known that you've started to be given this sort of nickname, and you've been given the nickname of Heel Bradley, at least from what I've heard. This is mainly off of previous Mayhem Show episodes, so I'm trying to get an idea of where did this nickname come from. Why are you being called Heel Bradley, and what does Chris LaRusso have against you?
Well, we'll apply the first question first. The
Okay.
name Heel Bradley was given to me by a friend of mine named Ken Smell.
Okay.
And I think he did it because he got it in his head that there was 2 different versions of me. One version is just a regular Bradley that deals that just friendly with people and nice with people and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're with me, really close friends, like I hardly will even curse. I'm not a guy that curses a lot. My attitude towards it is if I say damn that and damn and a damn and damn and a damn and damn, and it loses its puncture. It
Right.
loses its punctuation.
Yeah.
So I don't really curse too much. And then if I'm with my friends and we're close enough, and I do start to curse, it's like, Bradley, you just said damn. Oh my gosh. That's not Bradley. That's Heel Bradley.
Okay.
So that's where the name came from. And he called me that. And then more and more people called me that. And the nickname stuck. Now, Chris LaRusso. The problems with Chris LaRusso probably started early on when I was at a show and I saw Chris, and I like to try to think of chants and things for people. And when I saw Chris, this was at a Black Diamond Wrestling show. Now, behind me are 3 people, Nick Griffin, Tim Napolitan, and I can't remember the third gentleman. He's a really nice guy, and I can't remember his name right now. I eventually would get to know all 3 of these guys, but they're razzing on the wrestlers, and I'm razzing on the wrestlers, and we don't know each other yet. And I see Chris LaRusso, and I don't want to waste my whole time trying to think of something to say. I'll go but I look at Chris, and I'm like, he looks a little bit like The Miz.
Oh no.
All right, so what can I say? What can I do here? Can I do a poor man's Miz or something? And I think of it. And I turn to the 3 guys and I, hey guys, discount Miz. And then suddenly the 4 of us start chanting, discount Miz, discount Miz. Alex, that chant caught on like wildfire for about a year and a half. It got to the point where I wouldn't have to start the chant. Chris LaRusso would be out there, and I'd hear other people going, discount Miz, discount Miz. And the two stories I'll give you with that. One is, remind me, who are the American Wolves? Do you remember?
That would be. I want to say that's Davy Richards
Davy Richards.
and
Thank you.
Kyle
He had a.
O'Reilly.
It might have. No, I don't think it was Kyle O'Reilly, but you got the name I was trying to remember.
Oh,
Davy
okay,
Richards.
okay. Because I remember
Crystal
they.
Russo had a great match with Davy Richards, and we're chanting "Discount Miz," and suddenly in the middle of the match, Davey Richards was soaking this up. He loved Discount Miz. He was getting into it. He was getting everybody into it. And at one point in the match, Chris LaRusso gets Davey into a full Nelson and yells out, "Discount who?" And he does a skull crushing finale on Davey Richards. And my other story, my favorite story, is where I'm at a Vicious Outcast Wrestling event in West Virginia. And beside me is a father and son. The son, all of maybe 7 or 8, just the nicest little boy you could ever talk to. And I'm having fun with him. And I'm pointing, and we're looking at the flyer for the next show. And I'm goofing around, and I say, "Oh, that's Ninja Guy. Oh, that guy's big hairy guy, and everything." And he points at Chris LaRusso, and he says something, and I see Chris LaRusso over just a little bit over it. I say, "Hey, Chris, come here for a second." And Chris is all grumpy coming over. "Yeah, what do you want? What do you want?" And I go to Child. I say, "I want you to tell Chris what you just told me when you looked at that picture." And the little kid looks up at Chris and goes, "You look like the Miz." And Chris goes, I'm going to throw you when I come out there. I'm going to make an example out of you."
Wait, did he tell you? He said he was telling you he would throw you, or?
He told the kid. He was threatening the kid.
Oh, that's great. See, because that's something that Jordan Grace has been doing lately, throwing people.
She has been. She
Yeah.
has been. I've gotten to see her a couple times on the Indies. Great performer. Great performer.
Yeah. By the way, I just remembered. So I just remembered who the other American Wolf was. It was Eddie Edwards. And I remember
That's
that now because for two reasons. One, because I remembered that the other American Wolf, was either WWE or Impact. Because Davey Richards is basically not doing much of anything right now that I know of. But Eddie Edwards,
Oh,
who last I knew was still with Impact. The other reason I remember that now is because they briefly were in NXT as the American Pitbulls.
okay.
I remember that because that was one of those things, kind of like when they change, when certain people come into WWE, they start out in NXT and they give them some random name, you know, like it started
Yeah.
with Daniel Bryan and it got to a point where you had like Caval for Loki, stuff like that.
Or
And
when Samoa Joe went on and they called him Joey Samoa.
Joey Samboe. Yeah.
I heard someone did make that joke.
Yeah, yeah, there's been, but that's a, on a slight side note, it's like that's kind of crazy. Like, it's interesting to me now that we're at a place where very rarely does a NXT signee actually have to be given a new name upon joining. Although I think it's usually based on how big a deal they are, because you have the people that get announced via like Twitter, like when
Mm.
Stokely Hathaway signed. Like he has his name changed. He's like Court Moore or something like that, I think. Stuff like
Well,
that.
I'll bet they'll get back to that. And I'm just, I don't know, but I would bet they would get back to that because they don't want someone coming in. I mean, that was to me one of the reasons for the name change is because if they're going to build you up into somebody big, they're going to build you up under their name,
Yeah,
not your name.
yeah, exactly.
So
It's to some degree it's the copyright, and also like you said, they're building you up to be something based on how they want it to be done or whatever. And yeah, that's what I was thinking of, like, because now you have like quite a few of the bigger names that get signed, and they wrestle under those names, like the names that they have, like Kushida, one of the most recent guys who just started on NXT television. He's wrestling under Kushida, you know,
yeah,
just stuff like that. It's like, okay, this isn't like, and so like when So, for example, when Shinsuke Nakamura actually signed with NXT, and there was a big media hype about him arriving to America, going to the Performance Center, and I remember I kept wondering when they were gonna give him like a different name, and they never did. He's just Shinsuke, and you know he's been on the main roster since. And I think I want to say one of the last big signings they had that I can recall that actually they changed the name upon his arrival was when Prince Devitt got signed,
Mm-hmm.
and they changed it to Finn Balor. And to be fair, you almost for me it's like I almost had to remember that he was Prince Devitt before he went to NXT.
Right.
Like by now, Finn Balor, between his NXT run and the stuff he's been doing on the main roster, it's like that's the name that sticks now, and that's a WWE name, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
just stuff like that. It's like between him, Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens, those big names that got changed or at least tweaked, and then you have some of the bigger names that arrive in NXT. But anyways, yeah. But yeah, going back to the point, so I don't ramble on too long. Like, yeah, that was the other American Wolf was Eddie Edwards. But yeah, so that's
Okay.
interesting. But yeah, so it's just like okay, so the issue between you and Chris Russo is that he looks like the Miz, which clearly
That was the start of things. I'd say these days he doesn't look quite so much as the Miz, but he's we still have our issues. He's saying that the day that he wins the IWC Heavyweight Championship, he will come out and super kick me in the head. He's promising me that he's going to do that.
well,
He's promising me he's going to take me out. I mean, you can find on my timeline, promos that he did just for me, telling me that he's going to take me out. And I've had at least once or twice have him come up right in behind me, wrap his arms around my neck, telling me this is it, this is the end,
no.
just to let me go as I'm quivering.
Man, wrestling at these shows is very much a very tight knit community, I'd say.
Very much so, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay, so I've made a mental note to go back and watch some of these things happen over on indiewrestling.us and
Mm-hmm.
the indiewrestling.us network at indiewrestling.network. See what I did there?
Absolutely. I'm on that network, and I like watching some of the shows that I don't get to, and some of the shows I've been to that I saw matches I really like, and I go back to it to see that match again. I will go. I definitely want to go back to see what was the Tony Johnson, Lee Moriarty at the last Rise.
Okay. That's Rise with a Y.
Rise with a Y. Thank you. Very good event. A very good match between those two. And if you've heard people, if there's any name that you might want to remember, Lee Moriarty is. I've told people at the beginning, as you go in and you see these wrestlers and you don't really think too much of it, you immediately think, oh, there's about like 10, 20 guys here that are going to make it huge someday. And then when you see them, and they're very good, and they're very entertaining, and then you see AJ Styles come in, and you see a match of AJ Styles, and you see just how high of a level, you get to appreciate even more how good you have to be to get to that level. Yeah. And at that point, when I look at the people around here, I think there are a lot of really good wrestlers around here. I think there are only maybe 2 or 3 that could get really huge someday. And one of those 2 or 3 around here right now is Lee Moriarty. And if you talk to some of the wrestlers and you say, some people are saying Lee Moriarty is the guy that's going to make it huge someday, they're going to say, yeah, I'd agree. Probably that he's going to go to Japan or something.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Um, yeah, because I've been kind of reading up on that, trying to watch the stuff on the social media as much as possible. So that's really,
Mhm.
I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's like there's that difference between going to see pro wrestling live, like you go to indie show and go watch that versus like, you know, the experience of watching it on, whatever media device you have. You know, there's I
Well,
think
I would go further and say there's a huge difference between being front row at an indie show
hmm
and being in section B4, seat 35 at a WWE show where you're about 50, 100 feet away from the ring.
yeah, I for
There's a
sure. That's
huge difference there.
yeah, I agree with you. I've had both of those. Yeah. Yeah, because Sorg and I had gone to the Rise with an Eye wrestling event in in Southgate like a week or two ago, and we were basically front row. We kind of got shuffled around a little bit because of seating, but we were like second row, and that was really good. I've been in front row in indie shows. I've been at like the smallest indie show I was ever at was like my earliest ones, and there was only like 2 rows of bleachers, kind of surrounding
Hmm.
3 walls of the room. So it's like I've been to shows where, yeah, like you said, it's a much more intimate atmosphere when you go to those shows, and then you go to a WWE show, and unless you are like crazy rich or at least able to get a hold of floor seating, then you're stuck up in the nosebleeds, so to speak. Like
Yeah.
I've like the closest to the ring I've been for a WWE show was like I want to say halfway down from the nosebleeds, like or halfway up from the floor seating. I've been to like a couple Raws, and those are fun too. But yeah, like you said, from even from that seating, you're pretty far from the ring, and it's like, at that point, it's like you are almost exclusively there for the experience of WWE. Kind of like I was mentioning before about the live events. Whereas at an indie show, you get to enjoy the experience of the indie show, but also like the different stars that are trying to make a name for themselves.
There was an early WWF event that I was second row.
Oh, nice.
I got in early enough to get second row. This was at the head of the Bret Hart Owen Hart feud.
Oh,
So the main event was Bret Hart with British Bulldog in his corner versus Owen Hart with Jim Neidhart in his corner.
nice.
So I remember that at that time, Lex Luger had a feud with a newly turned heel Crush. This was face painted Crush before he went to Demolition. I remember getting a double high five from Lex Luger that night.
Right, right.
But and I had pictures. I was trying to get pictures, and I lost all the pictures I had. But
Okay.
that's no big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was the closest I was. I had gone to some WWF events, some NWA events. But as I do these indies, I would say I am front row something like 98% of the time.
hmm
I'm usually front row. I like the interaction. Some of these guys need to be yelled at, so
Uh-huh.
I'll yell at. So I usually get front row, and in indies, especially the ones that aren't huge, it's relatively easy to be front row. All you have to do is be early.
Right, right.
You
We're,
know, I would imagine something like PWG, it would be pretty tough.
yeah.
But for Rise with a Y or Black Diamond, if you get a hold of the promoter and said, "Hey, can you reserve a seat for me?" Or IWC, if you buy your ticket early enough, you can get front row. It's
Oh,
not
for
too
sure.
easy. I mean, it's not too hard.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, I'm usually front row. I'm usually interacting with the good guys and telling the bad guys they're awful people.
As you do, as you do. Yeah. See, it's funny you mentioned PWG because I've been to like I think I've been to I'm trying to think. I've been to a total of 4 PWG shows like ever. and that was since
Mm-hmm.
like my first two were in 2012. I went to the one in the during the Wrestle Reunion convention. That's the one. Like I said, that was when I met Virgil during intermission.
Mm.
That was let's see. Oh, uh, and then like later that year, I went to the American Legion Hall where they do their where they used to do their usual shows in Reseda. That was a very different experience, but like I had that one was interesting because I get like you said, I got there early and was able to get a general admission seat, and I ended up being in the second row, which was really good. But what was really
Okay.
funny about that was that it was one of the last shows where they had tickets available at the door. Shortly after that,
Yeah.
they stopped doing like I want to say with less than a year after that show took place, they were restricting tickets to just whatever they had online. And
Mm-hmm.
to be fair, that's their business model. They know that they're going to sell out fairly quick, and they are still selling out fairly quick. So it's it's whatever works for. That's kind of like the fact that they don't do any live streaming or iPay review type shows. They always have done, they tape their shows for DVD. You know, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like the on the flip side of that, the most recent shows I'd been to, I went to one of the last ones at the Reseda at the American Legion Hall because they stopped. As of right now, they've stopped doing it there because other people own that building now. So
Oh.
yeah, so there was the rumor was that they were gonna whoever owned it was actually just gonna tear it down. I don't know what the status is on that anymore. I just know
Okay.
that they finally moved to the Globe Theater in Los Angeles. A bigger venue, holds more people, way different seating arrangements. But
Mm.
one of those, but I got to go to, oh, I want to say, I went, oh, that was the thing. I got to go to a Battle of Los Angeles for the very first time, like night one of their tournament. And that was a lot of fun. And I was really happy to get to go to that. And it was a very different atmosphere even from the Reseda show. It was a little bit of a bigger venue, so different seating arrangement. But yeah, same basic principle where it's like you had to buy your tickets online. Whereas, like you said, with the smaller indie shows like Rise with a Y, you have to go, you go there
Yeah.
early to get a good seat.
Did anybody tell you that Rise with a Y is basically run out of what used to be a movie theater?
I think I've heard that before, because I know I've heard. I think, yeah, I think I might have heard that before. Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah.
Sorg might have mentioned that before because I know there's been other events, like other promotions used to run out of other weird locations. Like there was like one promotion that ran a single show out of like what used to be a mall, or maybe a couple shows out of what used to be a mall, and then that closed
Oh,
down.
that's yeah. When the Century 3 Mall, which if you go on one of those dead mall YouTube channels,
Uh huh.
that go to that one because that one's dead. And I know there was a couple promotions that were running out of that because what else were they doing? Nobody was really selling anything at the shops there.
Right. It's
So I didn't get to go to any of those, but I know they ran some out of there. I've been to a couple that were at some of the area bars where I specifically remember Billy Ruxpin, who is about 6 foot 3 or something like that. Just he's a very playful character. He's like a big kid, and I remember getting in the ring, just looking up, reaching up, and touching the ceiling. And we're kind of watching that like, okay, we're not going to see too many 5-star frog splashes at this event.
yeah. It's
Not if
like
you don't want to be hanging from the chandelier or something.
yeah. I was gonna say with those mall shows, it's like it's either run a wrestling show or shoot yet another remake of Dawn of the Dead. Because that
Uh huh.
movie was all centered around a mall. So, but yeah, so that's cool. So I did want to touch on my next point here, because we were talking a little bit. You mentioned that Heel Bradley is kind of this other sort of persona that you've kind of gotten that nickname from, and so one of my other personas is Alex Chakarza, the host of Chikara in 15 Minutes or Less. And the question from Alex Chakarza has to do with the fact that you recently got to go see Chikara when they went to Pittsburgh for the anniversario show. And then I was just kind of curious what your thoughts on with Chikara was for that. Was it like a very different experience for you, or how was that experience?
Chikara has a good niche market. I appreciate that. Number one, they have very skilled wrestlers. They have very, you can see who's out there and who they bring out, and see that, they bring out very talented people.
Mm-hmm.
And then second thing is that they also enjoy the cartoon character side of the rest of the wrestlers and bringing out strange and interesting people. I
Sure.
have all the appreciation in the world that this past weekend I got to see a wrestler that was named Still Life with Apricots and Pears. I fully appreciate the fact that I got to see that a wrestler with that name that weekend.
For sure. For
Um,
sure.
but it was a different product. I had a lot of appreciation for what they did. It was a fun show. The crowd was a very good crowd. They really respected. They were really glad to see Chikara. There was some fans I don't get to see real often that came out because Chikara finally came back to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And they knew the catchphrases and things like that. I don't know the people quite as well as others, but I can tell you when Mike Quackenbush surprised everyone for a match, everybody stood up and
Nice.
was like, "Oh God!" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, absolutely." And I sort of know him a little bit. I don't know my Chikara all that well. I've seen a handful of the guys appear at other events in the area.
Right.
Like I just saw Whisper at the Sean Phoenix benefit.
Oh, okay.
So I've seen a couple of those guys before. I just saw I saw Dasher Hatfield in a 6-man at the Remix Marietta event.
Oh, okay.
So now I have an issue with Dasher Hatfield because he was facing Andrew Palace, who is one of the guys I really like, one of the guys I've followed for almost the whole time I've been watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm yelling at Dasher Hatfield, and yet Dasher's yelling back at me. And Dasher goes in and has a great match with Andrew, but he gets his legs on the ropes to pin Andrew Palace, and he gets the win. He rolls out right over to me, comes over to me, and puts his arm right in front of me and starts pointing at his wrist. And I know what he wants. All right, fine. And I'm not thrilled about it. And I'm showing I'm not thrilled about it, but I raise his damn hand just to get the guy away from me. So fine, Dasher. There you go. You get your little moment. Now get the hell away from me.
Oh, that is surprisingly on brand for him because without getting into it too much, the thing about Dasher is that he's become, as you've gotten to see from that match, he's become a bit of a jerk, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit shocking because this kind of started at the beginning of at the season finale from last year. It was it was basically the last show of the year, and almost out of the blue, he just started to become more of a jerk. He's had some points about because a lot of it has to do with the fact that he won. Like he became champion as in the interim while Mr. Touchdown, his relative, his step cousin in law, as he puts it, he was injured. So Dasher was named as the interim grand champion. And so
Yeah.
he defended the title 3 or 4 times while Mark Angelo said he was injured. And then when Mr. Touchdown was finally cleared to start wrestling again, and this news came out at the end of last season, so in December of last year. So he found out that he was cleared to wrestle again, and so they were starting to people were wondering, oh, so does this mean that he just gets his title back? But Dasher, just and to some degree, it's understandable. He felt that because he had actually defended the title in the interim while Mark was injured, that he deserved to be champion. So he didn't give it right back.
Well,
So
as we go to these things, and we have a passion for this, and we want to see good wrestling, but the problem is you have to deal with bad people.
Mm-hmm.
And bad people like Dasher Hatfield, bad people like Bulk Nasty, bad people like Jackson Argos and RC Dupree. Jackson Argos just yells at me. RC Dupree specifically, he knows I'm a Ronnie Garvin fan. And he'll take a moment out of his time. He walks by beneath, like suddenly stops, turns back, turns to me, smiles, and said, Ronnie Garvin sucks.
Oh, my goodness.
And then goes on his way.
Wow.
Jocelyn, female wrestler in this area. If I have popcorn on me, she will steal my popcorn.
Oh, man.
And it's like, but you have to deal with it.
Right.
And sometimes these people, they get beat up by your heroes. They get beat up by Andrew Palace or Wardlow or Lee Moriarty, guys like that. Sometimes my heroes will just take those people and say, you know what, I got to smack you around a little bit. Laura Lovelace is going to come out and beat up Jocelyn, or Jinx will beat up Jocelyn a little bit too. And that's what we're waiting for. That's the triumph of going to the event and seeing that jerk, seeing MT OSHA, a couple of guys that I just don't like, and see them get their butt handed to them. That's half the reason why I'm there.
Nice. Which is actually a nice little transition to kind of my final main question. So, what would you say is your favorite thing about pro wrestling right
now? Like pro wrestling in general, indie wrestling?
Yeah, in general, or indie wrestling, whatever you know.
In the Pittsburgh area, I'll answer it sort of this way. Marcus Mann, who has a lot to do with Rise with a Y, said there is so much wrestling in Pittsburgh, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And it's a burden and it's a luxury. The luxury that I always try to appreciate is that there are places 2 hours from us that don't have anything. Right. Or if they do something, it's not good.
Right.
In Pittsburgh, we've got, I bet you I could count at least 7 feds in the area. And probably at least half or a little more are pretty good stuff. It's full of people that are fully trained. It's full of people that just don't want to go out and play star. It's people that are passionate about it. But you've got a couple feds that they're going to have untrained people. They're going to have bad-looking people. They're going to have the sort of flyers that you've seen that look like they're made out of Microsoft Paint or something like that. So, the good thing is that there's just so much of it, and there's so much great talent, and there's just so many good people for you to meet, wrestlers that are just happy to see you there, and you just go up and talk to, and fellow fans that I'm friends with, promoters, referees, cameramen, that you go there and it's a party. You're going to a party.
For sure.
And the more that you get to know all these people, and if you really want to enjoy the party, all you got to do is be respectful and friendly.
Yeah.
And you'll end up talking to a lot of people. So what's the best thing about it right now in Pittsburgh? There's just so much of it. I literally alternate my weekends between wrestling events and visits with family. So my weekends get booked. On the rare occasion I might have a free weekend, it's kind of nice, but you don't have a bunch of empty weekends that you don't know what to do with yourself, you know?
Right. Well, that just about does it for me. I want to thank you again for having this chat. I know Sorgatron was really excited about having you be a guest on this show, and I'm very happy to have you on. It was a lot of fun chatting with you about kind of the old school wrestling stuff and kind of looking
Sure.
at the indie scene in Pittsburgh and West Virginia. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again to Bradley Ruthers for what was a great chat. I had a lot of fun talking to him, and in fact, we actually had quite a bit to talk about before and after the main interview. With his permission, I got to clip these out and post them on the Patreon page under what I'm calling Occupy Pro Wrestling XL. So if you want to hear some stories about Virgil, as well as how Bradley met Jess Flexor and introduced Lake Wrestling to the Wrestling Mayhem show, and even a story featuring Mia Yim, be sure to check out patreon.com/OccupyProWrestling and support us for as little as $1 a month. You'll be glad you did, I promise. And with that, we bring this episode of Occupy Pro Wrestling to a close. Thanks again to Bradley for chatting. Thanks to all of you for listening. And if you haven't already, check out OccupyProWrestling.com. Like, follow, and subscribe to us on all the different platforms you can find. And until next time, enjoy yourself some wrestling.